You know how when you get a helium balloon as a kid, you take it home and at first it floats so well. I mean, you knock it down, it comes right back up. You knock it down, it comes right back up. It's almost like it's alive. It's full of joy. But you take it home. Remember taking your balloons home? If it didn't get popped, and if you didn't let go of it and it went up to the sky, you took it in your room, it started out on the ceiling, but when you woke up, it was down on the floor. Religion has a tendency to start out on the ceiling. But because it can't bust through that ceiling and go any further, it eventually just goes back down to the floor. So one thing that happens to religious organizations is that they just slowly lose their helium, you might say. They lose whatever it was that made them exciting, that made them attractive, that made them real. The other thing that can happen is that sometimes when you have a balloon, an organization that's already full, and you start trying to cram more stuff into it, you try to introduce new ways of looking at things, new ways of doing things, new people. What happens? You know what happens? A lot of churches pop because they could not hold all that God was pouring in there. And one of the reasons that a whole lot of you, whether you came to CCF 2 years ago or 2 months ago, maybe even 2 weeks ago, you're here at least in part because of some balloon that busted. And it was the only balloon you had. And you're wondering, what now? What else is there? God, where do I go? Where do I find a place? And others are here because they just got tired of living down on the floor. They got tired of spiritual pond water. And all of us are always looking. And do you know, by the way, that's the way new denominations get started. A fresh movement of God happens. I mean a genuine movement of God. Authentic, the real thing, powerful. It starts out that way. Martin Luther and the Reformation and the Lutheran Church. John Wesley. John Wesley started out in the Church of England, but he started growing. He started expanding, and this balloon he was in couldn't handle that. So he was kicked out. He was not allowed to preach in any pulpit, so he found himself preaching out in the fields, in the streets. He preached a sermon from his father's tombstone because you can never get rid of the Spirit. The Holy Spirit is alive. It's forever. It's always on the move. It's always doing a new thing. And here's the reality. If we can't contain it, if we can't handle it, if we don't have room for it, it'll leak out or pop out and go somewhere else. What we've got to do at CCF is recognize that God, basically CCF is a new balloon. You are that balloon. You are fairly flexible. You are pretty pliable and elastic, or you wouldn't be here. You'd have been gone 5 minutes ago when that gun came out. CCF is a fresh balloon. But Jesus would use a different term that fit his time. He'd say, we are a new wineskin. A new wineskin. I don't know how familiar you are with wineskins, what their purpose was, what they were all about. I'll give you a quick 1 minute, hopefully 1 minute explanation. In the ancient world, they didn't have glass bottles or aluminum cans as we do. And the wine, which was the primary beverage other than water that people lived off, it had to be stored. And that meant you had to have some sort of container that could hold it. And most often, they used an animal skin. I know it sounds yucky, but it really wasn't. It was a tanned, cured hide. It was airtight. It was watertight. But new leather, as you may know, is a little bit flexible. It's got a little stretch to it. And so you take a new wineskin. By the way, this would have looked like some sort of bladder of water, like when you go backpacking and you got this thing on your back, it looks like a sack of water, and there's a tube that comes from it to your mouth. It was more like a sack. And the new wineskin, you put new wine in it. That's wine that had not yet fermented. It's basically juice at that point. And as the wine fermented, it released gases that had to go somewhere. And if you had a new wineskin, the wineskin expanded. It was flexible. It was elastic. It could handle it. On the other hand, suppose you put the new wine in an old wineskin, one that is stiff and brittle and crusty and got those cracks in it like leather gets. And you put the new wine in there, and it starts to transform, and that new gas is released. There's nowhere for it to go. There's an explosion, and there's a big mess. Well, the Jewish religious system of Jesus' day, Jesus said, that is basically an old wineskin. And Jesus was bringing new wine. And the old wineskin, the old religious institution, could not handle what Jesus was doing, what he was saying. For one thing, he was bringing in people that the old religious structure had no room for. He was bringing in people that never had a good place in the old structure. They really didn't even feel welcome there. They felt out of place there. Jesus brought those people in. And that made it hard. The wineskin started to swell. But Jesus also was teaching them things they'd never heard before. Things that sounded blasphemous. They thought that they honestly believed that Jesus had come for one main reason, and that was to destroy everything they held dear. The spiritual traditions that had their fathers and forefathers had followed, and they wanted to pass on. They felt like he'd come to destroy that. They were wrong. He didn't come to destroy it. He said, I came to fulfill it. I came to fill in the missing pieces. I came to add to the growing understanding of God. You have noticed in the scripture, if you haven't, start looking for this. There's a progression of revelation in the Bible. You start off in the book of Genesis, and you're dealing with a group of people who knew next to nothing about God. Abraham was raised in a family who were worshipers of many gods, polytheist. They knew nothing of the one God. That was a foreign concept to them that sounded peculiar. But God spoke to Abraham, said, come out. I want you to start in a new place, start a new thing, and I'm going to do a new thing. And through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. But there was really one main truth that Abraham understood. And it seems so simple to you that, and it is, because your 3-year-old knows this, there's one God. There's one God. You've known that your whole life. Had you lived in the days of Abraham, that would have been news. Hard to believe news. Fresh news. But in Genesis, there was a progression up through Jacob and Joseph. But even in the days of Exodus, they learned that God had certain expectations from them. They were given the 10 Commandments. And they began developing an elementary understanding of who God was and what He wanted from them. And man, Exodus, the book of Exodus, the law that follows is precious, it's priceless. Without it, there would have been no Jewish religion that Christianity sprung from. But it was not the end, you see. It was really just the beginning of a growing, expanding process. And as you go through the Scripture, in the prophets, Isaiah, Daniel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, more and more and more is revealed about God. The picture gets bigger, bigger, fuller, fuller. And then comes Jesus. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Oh, not only was it hard to believe, it was shocking and yet true. Jesus was this huge new understanding of what God was like, of what He wanted from us. But He was dealing with some people. You're going to think I'm joking, but I'm serious. He was dealing with some people, the Sadducees, who truly believed with all their heart that the law, that's the first 5 books of the Bible, they truly believed that was God's last and final word to the human race. That was it. 5 books. God was done. Jesus, don't you start trying to bring in something we've not heard before. I don't know what they'd think. They could see our Bibles now. 66 books. I mean, they only had 61 to go. Didn't know it. But they didn't want to know that. Nobody likes to think. Let me rephrase it in a positive way. Instead of nobody likes to think, let me say, everybody likes to think that they've got everything figured out. Other people don't, but it just so happens I do. And I've been studying this, and I've been thinking, and here's how it is. And all of us it's our pride, it's our ego that just really loves to believe that this little balloon of ours is the ultimate balloon. Man, if it's not in this balloon, I don't need it. First 5 books of the Bible. First 5 books of the Bible. Jesus told these folks. He told them what was about to happen. Matthew chapter 9, verse 17. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, for the old skins would burst from the pressure, spilling the wine and ruining the skins. The new wine is stored in new wineskins, so that both are preserved. Let me make a few comments about that before shifting to a different application. If your goal is to preserve your old wineskin, that is the old container, the form, the outward institution with all its rules and all its expectations, if your goal is to preserve that, then I advise you, don't dare receive any new wine. Because new wine will explode that. But if you're like those that Jesus talked about, blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be what? filled. And you want all the new wine you can get. And listen, I'm not talking about new truth. I mean, for goodness sake, what's true is not new. I mean, if it's true, it's been true from the very beginning. We're not talking about newly made up stuff. We're talking about, it's more like a used car. It's not new, it's new to you. Well, we're not saying, oh, please don't misunderstand. We're not saying God has changed. Goodness, no. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. I'm the Lord, I change not. He hasn't changed. But as we grow in our understanding of Him, what changes is our experiences with Him, our knowledge, the people we meet who change our lives, the fresh ideas that set us free from legalistic things that used to just keep us beat down and ashamed of ourselves. By the way, legalism, fear and guilt is the main way that old wineskinners preserve their balloon. They try to make you so afraid and feel so guilty for questioning anything at all about their wineskin that most people won't do it. And that's worked for hundreds of years, but more and more people are just saying, I don't really need that. And that's why people are leaving the church in droves. And church attendance nationwide is going down, down, down. That's not the only reason, but that's part of it. Because fewer and fewer people are willing to stay inside little artificial man-made balloons. And so, part of the new wine, a big part of the new wine is all that Jesus has to offer you. You've read the 4 Gospels, but do you understand fully the 4 Gospels? Is there anything there that you might not have seen, noticed, understood? Let me see how I can best say this. You will have a hard time if you go around talking to serious Christian people. You'll meet very few, if any, who say that they don't believe the Bible. We all believe the Bible. See, the question is not what does the Bible say. A 5-year-old can show you that. Here it is. Here's what it says. The question is not what does it say. The question is what does it mean. And the questioning of what it means is what leads to expansion. And that's honestly what's created so many denominations. One group of people make a new discovery. For example, in the early part of the 20th century, Azusa Street, California, Pentecostal revival, they began experiencing things like people had only read about in the book of Acts. And I can tell it was legitimate. It was authentic. It was powerful. And from that came the Pentecostal movement, charismatic movement. Pentecostal movement, charismatics are just like Baptists and Methodists and Presbyterians in that, listen, there are some things that they understand well. Some things they understand better than anybody else because it is the thing God's revealed to them. The unique thing, the fresh thing. And we do well to learn from them in that area. But we also all have things in our tradition that are not so helpful. Things we'd be better off without. And that means anything that's about the outer forms rather than the heart and a living relationship with Christ. When it comes to a Baptist church, for example, so much to offer. And probably the single most important thing that the Baptist church brings into the mix is eternal security. You don't have to go around worried all the time that you might have lost your salvation last night because you drank something you shouldn't have or said something that was wrong. God has you in his grip. Christ has you in his grip. Nothing can pry you from his hand. You know, I sometimes think if you don't have a certain amount of security in your salvation, it's going to be hard for you to go any further because you're going to keep coming back over and over. Now, am I sure I was saved? Maybe I need to get saved again. How about, Lord, could I repeat that prayer one more time? Listen, I know. Man, early in my Christian life, I must have said that prayer, that sinner's prayer, which is not in the Bible, by the way. I must have said that 50 or 100 times because I didn't feel saved. I mean, all the major denominations that I'm aware of have something that is very valuable. God has sent it to us all through them. So, we receive it. I receive it from whichever direction God is sending it. And that means we also receive the people God sends from whatever direction they may come, whatever their background, whatever their status, wherever they're from, however they talk. That's hard to do. Man, this message is just as much about expanding for new people as it is expanding for fresh perspectives on the Christ we already know. It might even be harder, though, to actually expand enough and make room in your life for new people. Now, this is probably the most important thing I've said. And normally, when I see that I'm at the 28-minute mark, I rush up real quick and finish it. But there's something more here that needs to be revealed. And it's this. As CCF grows, it's not going to grow with more people whom you already know and already have a friendship with, you're already close to. Now, hopefully, many of your loved ones, your family, your friends will come and join. I hope they do. But the majority are going to be people you don't know. And I know how hard it is to really reach out and make friends. I mean, real friends with somebody you don't know when you already have a full social calendar. I don't think we really have any snobs here. I really don't. But what we do have is a lot of people who are just what I was when I lived in my home county, Monroe County, Alabama. My family had been there over 150 years. I was kin to, seemed like half the people. You know how that is. Every small rural town is like that. And when you grow up there and you got all this family around, you don't need other friends. You don't even have time for them. Because your own family is taking up all your time. There's no room for anybody else. It's not that you don't want them, that you don't like them. It's that you don't know where you'd fit them in. Well, if CCF really is what we hope it is, a whole lot of us are going to stretch our balloons. We're going to have to let some of that other stuff out, get rid of it, and make room for the people God is sending. couple of months ago, I had a conversation that was a bit discouraging, but not really, because it pointed out something I needed to know, something you need to know. I met with a lady who began coming to CCF a year and a half ago. It wasn't long after we started coming. Sweet Christian lady. She brought 2 or 3 friends with her. And then she stopped. They stopped and just disappeared after a couple of months. Well, recently I just had an idea to stop in and visit, and I did. We had a great talk, and the subject eventually came up, why I'm not there. I want you to know why I'm not there. And what she told me is what you need to hear, is what I needed to hear. She said, I love so much about CCF. I love so much about what I experience there and what I hear there and how people are growing there, but I never was able to connect with anybody personally. And here's what she said. Listen carefully. She said, what would happen is every week I'd come in and people would many times go out of their way, come over and speak to me, and they would say, welcome, so glad you're here. Then they'd get up and they'd walk back to where their friends were and they'd have a seat. And one person after another. So glad you're here. See you next week. And that was it. To the next week. Now, do I think that anybody saw this woman and thought, whew, I'm better than her. I'm not going to speak to her. I'm not going to make friends with her. That's not it. I know us better than that. I know myself better than that. Here's what it is. It's that we don't even think about it. It doesn't occur to us unless somebody points it out, which is what I'm doing. I'm not fussing because I don't believe anybody has intentionally excluded anybody. But it can so easily happen unless we intentionally include people. And what that means is, yes, I go over and I shake the hand. I say, I'm glad you're here today. I'm Lance. But before I walk off, I say, hey, you got lunch plans today? A group of us are going to the cafe at Cherry Hill. Would you join us? Hey, what are you doing Tuesday afternoon? I'm off work. You want to get together and have coffee? You want to go shopping? I'm headed to Fort Smith. I'd love for you to ride along. Most of us are not going to do something like that, at least up until this moment. We're not going to do something like that with a person we don't know. It's too much easier. It's too much more comfortable to go with our mama, with our cousin, or with our best friend ever since kindergarten. I understand it. It makes sense. It's not evil, but neither is it the way to reach people. That is not the way it will grow. I'll say it this way. So much of our potential to grow and reach not just hundreds but thousands of people, so much of that potential is out of my hands. It's in your hands.